Maniac McGee, Chapter 5. Later on that first day in Two Mills, there was a commotion in the West End. That's the white part of town. At 803 Oriole Street, to be exact. It was at the backyard of 803 Oriole Street, to be exacter. This, of course, was the infamous address of Finsterwald. Infamous means famous for a bad reason. Kids stayed away from Finsterwalds the way old people stay away from the movies on a Saturday afternoon of a $2 movie. And what would happen to a kid who didn't stay away? Well, that was a question best left unanswered. Suffice it to say, that's a nice way of saying anyway, suffice it to say that occasionally, even today, if some poor, raggedy, nicotine-stained wretch is seen shuffling through the town, word will spread that this once was a bright, happy, normal child who had the misfortune, bad luck, of blundering onto Finsterwald's property. That's why if you valued your life, you never chased a ball into Finsterwald's backyard. Finsterwald's backyard was a graveyard for tennis balls and baseballs and footballs and frisbees and model airplanes and one-way boomerangs. That's why his front steps were the only unsat-on front steps in town. And why no paper kid would ever deliver a newspaper there. And why no kid on a snow day would ever shovel that sidewalk, not for $1 zillion. So, it was late afternoon, and screams were coming from Finsterwald's. Who? What? Why? The screamer was a boy whose name is lost to us. For after this day he disappears from the pages of history. We believe he was about 10 years old. Well, we'll just call him Arnold Jones. Arnold Jones was being hoisted into the air above Finsterwald's backyard fence, and the hoisters were 3 or 4 high school kids. And this was one of the things they did for fun. Arnold Jones had apparently forgotten one of the cardinal rules. A cardinal rule is a most important rule for survival in the West End. Never, never let yourself be near Finsterwald's backyard and high school kids at the same time. So there's Arnold Jones being held up by all these hands, flopping and kicking and shrieking like some poor Aztec human sacrifice about to be tossed up a pyramid. No, no, please, he pleads, please. So of course, they do it. The high schoolers dump that kid into the yard. And now they back off, no longer laughing, just watching the back door of Finsterwald's house, the windows, the dark green shades. As for Arnold Jones, he clams up the instant he hits the ground. He's on his knees now, all hunched and puckered, and his eyes goggle at the back door. At the doorknob, he's paralyzed like a mouse in front of the yawning maw of a python. Now, after a minute or two of breathless silence, one of the high schoolers thinks he hears something and he whispers, "Listen! Listen!" Another one hears it. It's a faint, tiny noise. It's a rattling, it's a chittering, it's a chattering, and it's getting louder. Yes! Chattering teeth. They're Arnold Jones's teeth. They're chattering like a snare drum. And now, as if his mouth isn't big enough to hold the chatter, the rest of his body joins in. First, it's a buzzing like trembling, then the shakes. He's so afraid with fear, he's shaking all over. And finally, it's as if every bone inside him is clamoring to get out. A high schooler squawks, "Look, look, he's got the Finsterwallies!" Footnote: Finsterwallies are the violent tremblings of the body, especially in the extremities, the arms and the legs. "Yeah, yeah!" they yell, and they stand there cheering and clapping. Years later, when asked, the high school kids, their accounts differ about what happened. One of them said that a kid from nowhere hopped the fence, hopped it without ever laying a hand on it. to boost himself over. Another kid that was there says, nah, the kid just opened the back gate and strolled on in. Another one swears, nope, it was just a mirage. Some sort of hallucination, possibly caused by evil emanations. Emanations are spirits. Surrounding 803 Oriole Street. Real or not, they all saw the same kid, not much bigger than Arnold Jones, raggedy, flap-soled sneakers. And they all had one thing in their story in common. They all said the kid had a book in one hand. They saw him walk right up to Arnold, and they saw Arnold look up at him and faint dead away. He had such a bad case of the Finsterwallies, did Arnold have, that his body kept shaking for half a minute after he passed out. That phantom Samaritan, footnote, a Samaritan is someone who does a good deed. That phantom Samaritan stuck the book between his teeth, crouched down, hoisted Arnold Jones' limp carcass of body over his shoulder, and hauled him out of there like a sack of flour. Unfortunately, he chose to put Arnold down at the one spot in town just as bad as Finsterwald's backyard, namely, Finsterwald's front steps. When Arnold came to and discovered this, he took off like a horsefly from a fly swatter. And as the stupefied high schoolers were leaving the scene, they looked back. They saw the kid, who was cool times 10, stretched out on the forbidden steps, and he opened his book to read. Chapter 6. About an hour later, Mrs. Valerie Pickwell twanged her back screen door, stood on the top step, and whistled. Well, as whistles go, Mrs. Pickwell's, it was one of the all-time greats. It reeled in every Pickwell kid for dinner every night. Never was a Pickwell kid ever late for dinner. It's a record that will probably stand forever. The whistle wasn't loud. It wasn't screechy. It was a simple two-note job. One high note, one low note. To an outsider, it wouldn't sound all that special. But to the ears of a Pickwell kid, this whistle was magic. Somehow, it had the ability to slip through the slush of 5 o'clock noises to reach its target. So, whether they were at the dump, the creek, the railroad tracks, Red Hill, in ran the Pickwell kids for dinner. All 10 of them. Add to that, the parents. Baby Dee Dee, grandmother and grandfather Pickwell, great-grandfather Pickwell, a down-and-out taxi driver whom Mr. Pickwell was helping out, because the Pickwells were always helping out somebody. All that, and you had what Mrs. Pickwell called her small nation. Only a ping-pong table was big enough to seat them all, and that's what they ate around. Dinner was spaghetti. In fact, every third night, dinner was spaghetti. Side note, 10 kids, spaghetti they had so often because it's so cheap to buy. When dinner was over, and they were all bringing their dirty dishes to the kitchen, Dominic Pickwell said to Duke Pickwell, "Who's that kid?" "What kid?" said Duke. "The kid next to you at the table." "I don't know. I thought Donald knew him." "I don't know him," said Donald. "I thought Dion knew him." "Never saw him," said Dion. "I figured he was Deidre's new boyfriend." Deidre kicked Dion in the shin. Duke checked back in the dining room. "He's gone." The Pickwell kids dashed out the back door to the top of Rako Hill. They scanned the railroad tracks, and there he was, passing Red Hill, a book in his hand. He was running, passing the spear field now, and the Pickwell kids had to blink and squint and shade their eyes to make sure that they were seeing right. Because the kid wasn't running the cinders or alongside the tracks or the wooden ties that went like this. No, this kid was running where the Pickwell kids themselves, where every other kid had only ever walked. He was running on the steel rails themselves. Chapter 7. When Jeffrey McGee was next spotted, it was at the Little League field down at the park. There was a Little League game, and it had just ended. The Red Sox had won, but the big story wasn't that. The big story was John McNab, who struck out 16 batters to set a new 2 Mills Little League record. McNab was a giant of a kid. He stood 5'8", and he was said to weigh over 170 pounds. He had to bring his birth certificate into the league director to prove that he was only 12. And still, most people didn't believe it. The point is, the rest of the league was no match for John McNab. It wouldn't have been so bad if he had been a right fielder, but he wasn't. He was a pitcher. And there was only one pitch he ever threw. The fastball. Most of the batters never saw it. They just heard it whizzing past their noses, and you could see their knees shaking from the stands. One poor kid stood there long enough to hear strike one go past, and then he threw up all over home plate. It was still pretty light out after the game, because when there are a lot of strikeouts, a game goes fast, and McNab was still on the mound, even though the official game was over. He figured he was going to make baseball history, and he wanted to stretch it out as long as he could. There was still about 10 players around, Red Soxers and Green Soxers, and McNab was making them march up to the plate and take their swings. There was no catcher. The ball just zoomed to the backstop, and when a kid struck out, he went back to the end of the line. McNab was loving it. After each whiff, he laughed and bellowed the strikeout total. 26! 27! 28! He was like a shark. He had that bloodlust. The victims were hunched and trembling, walking like they were walking the gangplank. 34! 35! And then somebody new stepped up to the plate. He was a punky, runty little kid. No Red Sox or Green Sox uniform on. He looked kind of scraggly. And he had a book which he laid down on home plate. And he scratched out a footing in the batter's box. And he cocked the bat on his shoulder. And he stared at McNab. McNab croaked from the mound. Get out of here, runt! This is a Little League record. You ain't in the Little League. The kid walked away. Was he chickening out? Nope. He was lifting a red cap from the next batter in line, and he put it on, and he was back in the batter's box. McNab almost fell off the mound. He was laughing so hard. Okay, runt, number 36 coming up. McNab fired that pitch, and the kid swung. The batters in line automatically turned their eyes to the backstop where the ball should be. But it wasn't there. It was in the air, riding on a beeline right out to John McNab's head. The same line it came in on, only faster, and McNab froze and then flinched just in time. The ball missed his head, but it nipped the bill of his cap and sent his hat spinning like a flying saucer out to shortstop. The ball landed in the second base dust and rolled all the way to the fence in center field. Dead silence. Nobody moved. McNab was gaping at the kid, who was still standing there all calm and cool, waiting for the next pitch. And finally, a sort of grin slithered across McNab's lips, and he roared, Get my hat! Get the ball! 10 kids scrambled onto the field, bringing him the hat and the ball, and McNab had it figured out now. He was so busy laughing at the runt that he lobbed him a nice little lollipop, and the runt got lucky and pulled it. This time, McNab wasn't laughing. He fingered that ball, tips dug into the red stitching. He wound up and he fired, and he thought, man, that sucker's going so fast even I can hardly see it. And then he was looking up and turning. following the flight of the ball, which finally came down to earth in deep left center field, and it bounced once to the fence. More silence, except from someone who yelled, "Yep!" And then he caught himself. "Ball!" bellowed McNab. He was handed the ball and he slammed his hat to the ground. His nostrils flared. He was breathing like a picadored bull, and he windmilled and he ran and he lunged and he fired that ball in. This time the ball cleared the fence on the fly. No more holding back. The other kids cheered. Somebody ran for the ball, and they were anxious now for more. 3 more pitches. 3 more home runs. Pandemonium on the sidelines. It was raining red and green hats. McNab couldn't stand it. The next time he threw the ball, it was right at the kid's head. The kid ducked, and McNab called, "Strike 1!" The next pitch, he headed it right for the kid's belt. The kid bent his stomach around the ball. "Strike 2!" Strike 3 took dead aim at the kid's knees. And here was the kid swooping back to get out of the way, and at the same time, he swatted the bat at the ball like a golfer. It was the craziest baseball swing you ever saw. But there was the ball, smoking out to center field. "Hold it, Ron!" snarled McNab. "I can't pitch right. I got a whiz." And the kids on the sidelines made way as McNab stomped off the field, past the dugout, and into the woods between the field and the creek. They waited a pretty long time, but they figured, well, McNab's whiz probably would last longer than a regular kid's. Might even make the creek rise. And at last McNab was back on the mound, fingering the ball in his glove with a demon's gleam in his eyes. He wound up. He fired the ball, headed for the plate, and wait! What? A leg ball? The ball, it's got legs? Long legs? It was pinwheeling towards the plate. It wasn't a ball at all. It was a frog. And McNab was on the mound cackling away, and the kid at the plate was bug-eyed. Nobody's ever tried to hit a fast frog before. So what did the kid do? He bunted. He bunted the frog. He laid down a perfect bunt in front of the plate, third base side, and he took off at first base. He was halfway to second base before McNab jolted himself into action. The kid was trying for an inside-the-park home run bunt. The rarest feat in baseball. Something that had hardly ever been done with the ball, and it had never been done with a frog. And to be the pitcher who let such a thing happen? Well, McNab could already feel his strikeout record fading to a mere grain in the sandlot of history. So he lumbered off the mound after the frog, which was now hopping down the third base line. As a matter of fact, it was so close to the line that McNab had a brilliant idea. Just herd that frog across the line into foul territory. And it would be a foul frog, which is what he tried to do with his foot. But the frog, instead of taking a left turn at the shoe, he jumped over it and hopped towards third base. He was heading for the green fields of left field, and the runt kid, sounding like 2 runners with his flap soles slapping the bottoms of his feet, he was chucking dust for third base. There was only one hope now. McNab had to grab the frog and tag the runner out. But now the frog shot through his legs, over the mound, and now towards the shortstop, and now towards second. And McNab was lurching and lunging and throwing his hat at the frog, throwing his glove, and everybody was screaming. And the kid was rounding third base, and he was digging for home. And unbefroggable! The frog was heading back to home too. The ball, the batter, the pitcher, all racing for home plate. And it was the batter, the new kid out of nowhere, who crossed the plate first. At the same time scooping up his book, twirling his borrowed red cap back to the cheering others, and he jogging on past the empty stands and up the hill to the boulevard. McNab gasping, croaking after him, "Don't you stop till you're out of time, run! Don't let me ever catch you!" And that's how Jeffrey McGee knocked the world's first frog ball for a four-bagger, a home run. Chapter 8. And now, how did he come to be called Maniac? Well, after that first day, the town was buzzing. The school was buzzing. Hallways, lunchrooms, streets, playgrounds, West End, East End. It was buzzing about this new kid in town. The stranger kid, scraggly, carrying a book. Flap-soled junky sneakers. The kid who intercepted Brian Dennehy's pass to hands down and punted it back longer than Dennehy himself had ever thrown it. The kid who rescued Arnold Jones from Finsterwald's backyard. The kid who tattooed giant John McNab's fastball for half a dozen home runs and then circled the sacks on a bunted frog. Nobody knows who said it first, but somebody must have said, "Yeah, that kid's got to be a maniac." And somebody else must have said, "Yeah, he's a regular maniac." And somebody else said, "Yeah." And that was it. Nobody, well, except Amanda Beale, had any other name for him. Maniac. So pretty soon, when they wanted to talk about this new kid, that's what they called him. The Maniac. The legend finally had a name. But he didn't have an address, not an official one. Not an address with numbers. What he did have was the deer shed at the Elmwood Park Zoo, which is where he slept his first few nights in town. What the deer ate, carrots, apples, and day-old hamburger buns, that's what he ate. He started reading Amanda Beale's book on his second day in town, and he finished it that afternoon. Ordinarily, he would have returned it immediately, but he was so fascinated by the story of the Children's Crusade that he kept it and read it again the next day, and the next day. When he wasn't reading, he was wandering, and when most people wander, they walk. Maniac McGee ran. He ran around town. He ran around the nearby townships. He was always carrying his book, and he kept it in perfect condition. This is what he was doing when his life, as it often seemed to do, took an unexpected turn.